Felix Toju pushed through his front door, exhausted and angry. 8 months of silence had swallowed his household. 8 months since his wife Victoria died. 8 months since his 3 sons, James, Peter, and Daniel, had stopped being children. But today, something was different. He heard it. Laughter. Real, uncontrollable laughter that made his breath catch in his throat. His sons were laughing. Felix's briefcase hit the floor. He moved through the house, following the sound, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. When he pushed open the door to the sunroom, what he saw stopped everything. Vivian Michael, the woman his mother-in-law had hired a month ago, was on her hands and knees on the floor. His 3 sons were on her back, faces glowing with joy he thought was gone forever. Daniel held a rope around her neck like reins. Vivian was neighing like a horse, tossing her head, laughing with them like the world outside didn't exist. Felix couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She had done what he couldn't, what all his money and desperation couldn't do. She had brought them back. Hello, welcome to African Moonlight Tales. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with your friends, and most important thing, turn your notification bell so you can get informed when I dropped another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. What would you do if your spouse tried to kill you and you survive? Will you take a revenge or disappear forever? The day had been brutal. Felix Toju sat through meetings in Lagos that tore him apart. A failed product launch, investors pulling out, his board questioning everything he had built over the past decade. By 4 p.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his briefcase and left without a word to his assistant, ignoring the concerned looks from his executive team. The drive home felt longer than usual. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white against his dark skin. His mind wouldn't stop racing through everything that had gone wrong. At work, in his life, with God for taking his wife Victoria and leaving him with 3 sons he didn't know how to reach anymore. Anger sat heavy in his chest, not just at the failed launch or the nervous investors. Deeper than that, anger at life, at fate, at the drunk driver who had taken Victoria while she was out getting medicine for the boys. Anger at himself for not being enough for his children. When he pulled into the driveway of his estate in Victoria Island, he felt nothing but exhaustion seeping into his bones. He was only 35, but he felt ancient. He walked through the front door, loosening his tie, expecting what he always found, silence. The kind of silence that reminded him every single day that his wife was gone and his boys had stopped being children. The house had become a mausoleum where 4 people existed but didn't really live. But today, something was different. Laughter. He heard laughter echoing through the halls. Felix froze in the marble foyer, his hand still on his tie. His sons, James, Peter, and Daniel, were laughing. They hadn't laughed in 8 months. Not since Victoria died. Not since that terrible night when a drunk driver ran a red light and took her from them while she was simply picking up their prescriptions. His boys had become ghosts in their own home after that. Too scared to make noise. Too broken to remember what joy felt like. They woke up screaming from nightmares. They asked every day when Mommy was coming home, and Felix had to watch their faces crumble when he reminded them she wasn't. But right now they were laughing. Felix's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. He moved through the house, following the sound, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. His feet carried him down the hall toward the sunroom, the bright, plant-filled space that Victoria used to love, where she'd paint on Sunday mornings while the boys played. He pushed the door open. What he saw stopped everything. Vivian Michael, the woman his mother-in-law had hired a month ago, was on her hands and knees on the floor. His 3 sons were on her back, their faces glowing with a joy he thought was gone forever. 6-year-old Daniel held a rope around her neck like reins. 4-year-old Peter gripped her shoulders. 3-year-old James sat behind them, clapping his hands. Vivian was neighing like a horse, tossing her head, her braids swinging as she crawled across the floor. She was laughing with them, fully present, like she had forgotten the world existed outside this moment. Felix couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His sons, the ones who woke up screaming, who barely spoke, who had stopped playing months ago, were actually playing. And it wasn't with him. It was with her, a woman he barely knew. She had done what he couldn't, what all his money and desperate attempts couldn't accomplish. She had brought them back to life. If you're loving this story of healing and unexpected family, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more beautiful, emotional stories coming your way. Drop a comment and let us know what you think so far. The anger from Felix's day melted into something else entirely. Relief crashed over him first, so powerful it made his knees weak. Then came shame, hot and uncomfortable, for all the times he'd snapped at his sons when they cried for their mother, for all the nights he'd hidden in his office instead of sitting with their grief. And finally, gratitude. Gratitude so painful it felt like his chest was caving in. Then Vivian looked up. Her eyes met his across the sunroom. The laughter died instantly. Fear flashed across her face, raw and unmistakable. She froze on her hands and knees, suddenly remembering she was the hired help caught playing instead of working. The boys went quiet. They slid off her back and pressed close to her like they were protecting something fragile, something precious they were afraid he might take away. Felix stood in the doorway, unable to speak. His throat was too tight. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall in front of his children. Vivian opened her mouth, clearly searching for words to explain herself, to apologize for overstepping, but nothing came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her simple dress. Felix knew he should say something. He knew he should explain himself, or thank her, or tell her what he was feeling. This overwhelming gratitude mixed with grief and something he couldn't quite name. But he couldn't form words. He just stood there, staring at the woman who had given his sons back their laughter. Finally, Felix managed a small nod, just a slight dip of his head, an acknowledgement of what he'd witnessed. Then he turned and walked away before the tears came, before he broke down completely in front of everyone. He made it to his office and closed the door behind him before the first sob broke free. He pressed his back against the door and slid to the floor, covering his face with his hands as he wept, really wept, for the first time since Victoria's funeral. He didn't understand what had just happened. He didn't know if it was okay to feel this grateful to someone who was supposed to just work for him, who he paid to watch his children while he tried to keep his company afloat. But one thing was clear as crystal. For the first time since Victoria died, his sons were laughing. And maybe, just maybe, God had sent Vivian Michael for a reason. That night, Felix didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat in his office with the lights off, staring at nothing as the Lagos night deepened outside his window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but they might as well have been stars for all the attention he paid them. The image wouldn't leave his mind. Vivian on the floor, his sons laughing, that pure joy on their faces. That sound, God, that sound, kept playing over and over until he thought he'd lose what was left of his sanity. He kept asking himself the same question on an endless loop. How did she do it? He had tried everything after Victoria died. He'd read every book on childhood grief he could find, highlighting passages late at night, trying to memorize the expert's advice. He'd hired Dr. Adeyemi, the best child psychologist in Lagos. She came twice a week with her calm voice and her carefully chosen words, sitting cross-legged on the floor with James, Peter, and Daniel, trying to get them to talk about their feelings. It didn't work. The boys just stared at her with empty eyes. He bought them new toys, thinking maybe distraction would help, remote control cars, building sets, art supplies. They sat untouched in the playroom. He followed every piece of advice the experts gave him, maintaining routines, ensuring proper nutrition, getting them outside every day for fresh air and sunshine. Nothing worked. The boys just got quieter, smaller, like they were disappearing right in front of him, fading away like their mother had. And then Vivian Michael showed up. Felix leaned back in his leather office chair, rubbing his face with both hands. He didn't even remember hiring Vivian. That realization hit him hard now. His mother-in-law, Grace Okonkwo, had called him one afternoon while he was in the middle of a crucial acquisition meeting. She'd said the fifth nanny had quit, something about the atmosphere in the house being too heavy, too sad, too much for her to handle, and that she had found someone new. Felix had barely listened. He just said yes and gone back to his meeting, back to the numbers and projections that made sense when nothing else in his life did. That was a month ago. Now he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was Vivian Michael? Where did she come from? What made her different from everyone else who had tried and failed to reach his sons? He pulled out his phone and opened the file his mother-in-law had sent him. Vivian's employment application. He never actually read it. He just glanced at the header and approved the hire. Now he read every word. 25 years old. References from a family in Benin City who praised her warmth and dedication. No university degree. She'd gone to a teacher's college for 2 years before dropping out. Work history showed various nanny positions over the past 3 years, all with glowing recommendations. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom of the application that made Felix's breath catch. I understand grief. I won't run from it. Felix stared at those words for a long time, his thumb hovering over the screen. Most people in Felix's life avoided grief like it was contagious. He understood that now, though it had taken him months to see it clearly. When his friends didn't know what to say at the funeral, they chose silence. When they didn't know how to help in the weeks and months after, they kept their distance. Even his closest friends from university stopped calling after the initial condolence period ended. It was easier for them to pretend that Felix and his family were fine, that they had moved on, that life had returned to normal. But life hadn't returned to normal. Life had shattered into a million pieces, and Felix was still trying to figure out how to pick them up without cutting himself on the sharp edges. Vivian hadn't run. She had walked straight into the heaviest house in Lagos and somehow made it feel light again. She had looked at 3 broken children and a broken father and decided to stay. The next morning, Felix came downstairs earlier than usual. He told himself it was because he had an early call with investors in London, but that wasn't true. The call wasn't until 9. He had come down early because he wanted to see Vivian, wanted to understand what made her different. Vivian was already in the kitchen, moving quietly as she prepared breakfast. She didn't hear him at first. He stood in the doorway, watching. She wasn't doing anything special, just scrambling eggs in a pan, pouring orange juice into 3 small cups arranged on the counter, humming something soft and melodic under her breath. But the way she moved, calm, steady, present, it was like she belonged there, like she'd always been there. The boys came running in, still in their matching blue pajamas. Daniel saw her first, and his whole face lit up. "Vivian," he called out, his voice bright with genuine happiness. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, crouching down to his level. "Did you sleep well?" "I dreamed about horses," Daniel announced proudly. "Can we play horse again today?" Felix's chest tightened. The casual way Daniel spoke to her, the trust in his voice, it was something Felix hadn't heard in months. Vivian glanced up and saw him, standing in the doorway. Her smile faltered just for a second, like she still wasn't sure if she was in trouble for yesterday. "Good morning, Mr. Toju," she said quietly, straightening up. "Felix," he corrected, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Just Felix." She nodded, turning back to the stove, but he saw the slight tremor in her hands. James tugged on her shirt. "Vivian, can we play horse?" "What, sweetheart?" she asked, her attention immediately back on the boy. "Play horse like yesterday," James said, his eyes pleading. Vivian hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Felix. She was clearly waiting for him to tell the boys no, to remind them that Vivian had work to do, that playing games wasn't part of her job description. In Felix's mind, he wanted to tell the boys not to disturb Vivian, that she had work to do, that playing horse was not part of her job. The words formed on his tongue, ready to reinforce the professional boundaries he'd always maintained with staff. Instead, Felix surprised himself. "After breakfast," he said, looking at his sons. "You can play." All 3 boys turned to Felix, their faces wide with surprise and wonder. It had been so long since he'd said yes to anything, so long since he'd allowed joy into the house. Vivian looked at him too, clearly shocked that he wasn't angry about yesterday. After breakfast, Vivian repeated softly, smiling at the boys. "Now sit down and eat." They obeyed without argument, something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. The boys had fought every meal, every bedtime, every simple request since Victoria died. Felix poured himself coffee and sat at the far end of the dining table, watching. The boys talked to Vivian while they ate, really talked the way they used to talk to Victoria. Daniel told her about his dream in elaborate detail, complete with hand gestures. Peter asked if she liked elephants, launching into facts he'd learned from a nature documentary. James just sat close to her, occasionally touching her arm, like being near her was enough. And Vivian listened, really listened, like every word mattered. She asked questions, laughed at Daniel's dramatic storytelling, confirmed that yes, elephants were amazing creatures, and gently brushed crumbs from James's cheek. Felix realized something that made his throat tighten painfully. She wasn't just good with them. She loved them, actually loved them, and they loved her back. For the first time in 8 months, Felix felt something he thought was gone forever: hope. Over the following weeks, Felix started coming home earlier. He told himself it was because work was slowing down, that the failed launch had freed up his schedule. That wasn't true. Work was as demanding as ever. He was turning down meetings, delegating more to his executive team, making excuses to his assistant about why he couldn't stay late. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. He wanted to see them, wanted to hear his sons laugh again, wanted to watch Vivian somehow breathe life back into a house that had felt dead for so long. Most days he would find them in the playroom or out in the yard. Vivian would be sitting on the grass with all 3 boys, reading to them from picture books or helping them build elaborate structures with blocks. Sometimes they'd be playing chase, Vivian running at half speed, so they could catch her, all of them shrieking with laughter. She never made a big deal out of it. She wasn't trying to impress Felix or prove anything. She just loved the boys quietly and naturally, like it was the easiest thing in the world. Felix would watch from the upstairs window, careful not to interrupt these precious moments. He'd stand there for 15, 20 minutes sometimes, just watching his children be children again. The house still carried Victoria everywhere. Her paintings hung on the walls, bright, colorful abstracts she'd worked on late at night when she couldn't sleep, when inspiration struck and she'd pad down to her studio in bare feet. Her favorite coffee mug sat in the cabinet, unwashed, exactly where she'd left it that last morning. Her handwriting was still on the grocery list stuck to the fridge: milk, eggs, apples. Don't forget Daniel's medicine. He couldn't bring himself to erase it. Every time he opened the refrigerator, he saw her words and heard her voice. At night, after Vivian put the boys to bed, another miracle, since they'd fought sleep for months, Felix would walk through the rooms like he was searching for something he'd lost. Sometimes he would stop at the master bedroom door, his hand on the knob, but he couldn't go in. The bed was still made the way Victoria had left it. Her pillow still had the dent from her head. Her book was still on the nightstand, a bookmark halfway through a novel she'd never finish. Changing anything felt like erasing her, like admitting she was really gone. So he slept in his office instead, on a leather couch, surrounded by work he didn't care about anymore. It was almost midnight when Felix found Vivian in the library. He hadn't meant to. He'd just been wandering again, unable to sleep, his mind too full of thoughts and memories. When he saw the soft glow of the reading lamp, he paused. Vivian was curled up in the corner of the leather couch, barefoot, wearing simple cotton pajamas. A book lay open in her lap. She looked peaceful, like the weight of the house didn't touch her the way it touched him. Felix cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. Vivian looked up, but she wasn't startled, just calm, like she'd been half expecting him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked quietly. He shook his head and stepped further into the room, into the warm circle of lamplight. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure what to do with his hands, uncertain of the proper boundaries. Then he sat down across from her. Not too close, but not far. The silence between them felt different from the silence everywhere else in the house. It didn't press down on him like a weight. It just existed, comfortable and understanding. "What are you reading?" he asked finally. She held up the book so he could see the cover. "Beloved" by Toni Morrison. "Heavy reading for bedtime," he observed. "Heavy thoughts need heavy books," she replied simply, her voice soft but clear. Felix almost smiled. Almost. They sat in the quiet for a while. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to thank her for what she'd done for his sons. Didn't know how to ask her to keep doing it without sounding desperate or crossing some invisible professional line. Finally, he spoke, the words coming out rough. "They laughed yesterday." really laughed. I haven't heard that sound since. He couldn't finish the sentence. His throat closed up. Since Victoria, Vivian said softly, saying the name that everyone else avoided. Hearing his wife's name spoken out loud felt like a punch to the chest. Most people avoided saying it, like saying her name would break him further, like she was some kind of forbidden topic. But Vivian didn't look away from his reaction. She held his gaze steadily. They talk about her, Vivian continued. The boys. They tell me stories. Felix's throat tightened. What do they say? That she smelled like flowers, Vivian said. That she sang off-key in the car. That she let them eat dessert first on Tuesdays. That she did funny voices when she read bedtime stories. That she always knew when they needed a hug, even before they did. Tears burned behind Felix's eyes. Those were details he'd forgotten in his grief. Small things that used to make him laugh, ordinary moments that had felt so permanent he'd never thought to memorize them. Things that felt lost forever until now. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking, for remembering her through them, for not trying to erase her. Vivian closed her book and stood, setting it carefully on the side table. Good night, Felix, she said gently. She left the room quietly, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. Felix sat there alone, feeling less empty than he had in months. Maybe she wasn't just helping his sons heal. Maybe she was helping him too. 3 weeks passed in a blur of healing moments. Felix found himself looking for reasons to be home, making excuses he knew his executive team saw through but were too polite to question. He'd finish conference calls early, skip dinners with investors who wanted to discuss the next big opportunity, tell his assistant he needed to work from home more often. The truth was simple and undeniable. His house didn't feel like a graveyard anymore. One evening, Felix came home later than usual, around 8 p.m. A last-minute crisis at the office, the kind he used to handle with ease, but now found exhausting. The boys were already asleep, their rhythmic breathing audible through the baby monitor Vivian kept in the kitchen. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen. Everything felt normal, calm, peaceful. Then he heard it, crying. Soft, broken sobbing. The kind of crying someone does when they think no one's listening, when they finally reach the limit of their strength. Felix's chest tightened. He moved quietly toward the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, hidden in shadow. Vivian sat alone at the kitchen table, her back to him. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. In her hands, she held something small, a silver locket, open, catching the light from the overhead fixture. She didn't hear him. She was too lost in whatever pain had her by the throat, too consumed by grief she'd kept hidden for weeks. Felix didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched as this woman, who had been so strong, so steady for his sons, fell completely apart in his kitchen. Finally, she sensed him. Her head turned slightly. When she saw him standing there in the doorway, her eyes went wide with something like shame or fear. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, trying desperately to pull herself together. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean to. I'll just... Who's in the locket? Felix asked quietly, gently. Vivian froze, her fingers tightening around the silver chain. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she whispered. Her name was Alice. Felix stepped into the kitchen, moving slowly so as not to spook her. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, giving her space but offering his presence. Vivian's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled over, running down her cheeks unchecked. She died 2 years ago, she said, each word an effort. Leukemia. She was 3 years old. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and choking. Felix felt something crack open inside his chest, a fissure of shared understanding and pain. She was my daughter, Vivian continued, her voice shaking violently. My baby girl. We fought for a year. Hospitals, treatments, doctors who made promises they couldn't keep. I watched her get sicker, watched her lose her beautiful hair, watched her stop being a little girl and become someone I didn't recognize, someone so fragile I was afraid to touch her. Her hands trembled as she opened the locket wider, showing him the tiny photo inside. A little girl with a gap-toothed smile and bright, innocent eyes, holding a dandelion up to the camera like it was the most precious thing in the world. My husband blamed me, Vivian said, the words bitter on her tongue. Said I should have noticed the symptoms sooner. Should have pushed the doctors harder. Should have done something, anything, to save her. She swallowed hard. The marriage didn't survive it. He took everything in the divorce. All her photos, her toys, her clothes. This locket is all I have left of her. Felix's throat closed completely. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. I became a nanny because Vivian's voice broke completely, shattering into pieces. Because I don't know how to live in a world without children's laughter. It's the only thing that makes the quiet bearable. It's the only time I feel like I'm still a mother. She took a shuddering breath, looking up at Felix with tears streaming down her face. When I heard about your boys, about what they'd lost, I thought, maybe I could help them in ways I couldn't help my own daughter. Maybe I could give them what I couldn't give Alice. I'm sorry, she continued. I know this isn't professional. I know I shouldn't. You're not just helping them heal, Felix interrupted, his own voice rough with emotion. You're healing yourself through them. Vivian shook her head violently. I don't think I'll ever heal. Maybe not, Felix said honestly. But loving my sons, it's keeping you alive. The same way you're keeping them alive. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Her fingers were cold, trembling beneath his palm. They sat like that for a long time, neither of them moving, neither of them pulling away. Two people drowning in grief, holding on to each other in the dark. Vivian broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. Does it ever get easier? Living every day without someone you love. Felix didn't answer right away. He thought about Victoria, about the space she'd left behind, about how every morning he still reached for her side of the bed and found it empty and cold. Finally, he spoke. No, Felix said honestly. Losing someone you love doesn't get easier. But the pain changes. It becomes something you learn to carry instead of something that crushes you. You learn to breathe around it. Vivian nodded slowly, tears still falling. She closed the locket in her hand and pressed it against her heart, right over where it hurt most. Thank you, Vivian whispered, for not looking away. Felix squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for staying. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. They weren't employer and employee anymore. They were two broken people who had found each other in the ruins, who understood what it meant to lose everything and still have to keep living. Maybe that was what grace looked like. 3 months later, Mother's Day arrived, a day Felix had learned to dread with every fiber of his being. He woke up that morning with his chest already tight, anxiety pressing down on him like a physical weight. Last year, Victoria had been alive. The boys had made her cards with crayon scribbles and sticky handprints. She had cried happy tears and taped them to the fridge where they'd stayed for months, eventually fading in the sunlight. This year, the fridge was empty except for the grocery list in Victoria's handwriting that Felix still couldn't erase. He had planned the day carefully. He would take the boys to the cemetery, say a few words at Victoria's grave, lay fresh flowers, come home, and somehow get through the rest of the day. That was all he needed to do to survive it. But when he came downstairs, dressed in dark clothes suitable for a cemetery visit, he heard voices in the playroom. He walked to the doorway and stopped dead. Vivian sat on the floor with James, Peter, and Daniel, surrounded by construction paper, crayons, and glue sticks. They were making cards, carefully cutting and coloring and decorating. Felix's heart sank and swelled at the same time. She was helping them make something for Victoria. Of course she was. She understood what today meant, understood the importance of honoring Victoria's memory. He stepped closer, about to thank her for thinking of this, when he saw what the boys were actually creating. Daniel held up his drawing first, beaming with pride. A stick figure with dark skin and a big smile, surrounded by hearts. In crooked crayon letters, for Vivian. You make me smile. Felix's breath caught in his throat. James's card said, I love you, Vivian, with 3 stick figures holding her hand. Peter's was messy, but just as clear. A woman on her hands and knees with boys on her back, all of them smiling. Best horse ever, it read. They weren't making cards for their mother. They were making them for Vivian. Something twisted painfully in Felix's chest. Not anger, something deeper, more complex. A tangle of loss and relief, of grief and gratitude, of fear that his sons were forgetting their mother, and hope that they were finally healing. Vivian looked up and saw Felix standing in the doorway. Her face went pale, all the color draining away. She stood quickly, almost knocking over the glue bottle, her hands fluttering nervously. "I didn't ask them to do this," she said, her voice shaking with panic. "I swear, Felix. I told them we should make cards for their mother, but we did," Peter interrupted, holding up another card. This one had angel wings and flowers drawn in yellow and pink. "We made one for Mommy, too. See? We miss you, Mommy." Felix felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. They hadn't forgotten Victoria. They had just made room in their hearts for someone else. Children's hearts, he realized, were bigger than adults gave them credit for. Daniel tugged on Felix's sleeve. "Can Vivian come with us to see Mommy?" he asked, his young face so earnest, so hopeful. Vivian was already shaking her head, backing away. "No, I shouldn't. That's private. That's for your family." "You are family," Daniel said simply, with the kind of straightforward honesty only children possess. The words hung in the air. Felix didn't know what to say. Taking Vivian to Victoria's grave felt wrong, like crossing a line he couldn't uncross, like betraying something sacred and private. But his sons were looking at him with wide, hopeful eyes that had been empty for so long. And Vivian was standing there, terrified she'd ruined everything, terrified she'd overstepped in some unforgivable way. "If she wants to come," Felix heard himself say, "she can." Vivian's eyes went wide with shock. "Felix, are you sure?" "No," he admitted honestly. He wasn't sure at all, but he nodded anyway. An hour later, they stood together at Victoria's grave in a Koi cemetery. Felix, Vivian, and three little boys who didn't understand why love had to be so complicated. The boys placed their angel card carefully on the headstone, right next to the fresh flowers Felix had brought. Then they stepped back, suddenly quiet and solemn. Daniel reached for Vivian's hand and pulled her forward gently. "Tell Mommy you're nice," he whispered with childlike faith. Vivian knelt at the grave, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was soft but clear in the quiet cemetery. "I hope you don't mind that I love them," she said to the stone, to Victoria, to the universe. "I'm not trying to replace you. I could never replace you. I couldn't help loving them. They're so easy to love." Felix stood behind her, his throat too tight to speak, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. James whispered to the headstone, his small voice carrying in the still air. "Mommy, Vivian makes good pancakes, and she plays with us, and she doesn't get sad when we talk about you." That last line broke something in Felix. He'd been the one getting sad, the one pulling away, the one making his sons feel like loving someone new meant betraying their mother's memory. Vivian stood, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She met Felix's gaze, and something passed between them. Understanding, forgiveness, permission to keep living, permission to heal. 2 months after that day at the cemetery, Felix went to a charity gala at the Lagos Country Club. He didn't want to go. He'd been avoiding these events since Victoria died, uncomfortable with the pitying looks and awkward conversations. But his mother-in-law Grace was on the planning committee, and she had insisted with the force of maternal authority. "You can't hide forever, Felix. People want to see you. Life goes on." So he went, wearing his best suit and his best fake smile. The room was full of familiar faces, people who'd known Victoria, people who'd sent elaborate flower arrangements after the funeral and then never called again. They smiled at him now, polite and distant, like he was something fragile they didn't know how to touch. William Bola, a fellow tech CEO, approached with his wife Jane. "Felix, good to see you out," William said, shaking his hand with practiced corporate warmth. "How are the boys?" "Better," Felix said carefully. "Much better, actually." Jane smiled, but there was something sharp and calculating behind it. "Yes, I heard you found wonderful help. What's her name again?" Warning bells went off in Felix's head. "Vivian Michael," he said, keeping his voice neutral. And she's been quite devoted to the children from what I hear, Jane continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Some might say unusually devoted for household staff. Felix's jaw tightened, muscles jumping. I'm not sure what you're implying. Nothing at all, Jane said quickly, touching his arm with perfectly manicured fingers. I just think it's wonderful that she's so involved. Though some people do talk. There was a photo of you all at the farmer's market last week. The boys holding her hands, you pushing the cart. It looked very domestic. We were buying groceries, Felix said flatly, his patience wearing thin. Of course, Jane said smoothly. But you know how people are. A young woman, a widower, 3 impressionable children. She trailed off meaningfully, letting the insinuation hang in the air. William cleared his throat uncomfortably. What Jane means is maybe you should consider the optics. For the boys' sake. Felix's voice went cold as ice. The boys are happy for the first time in 8 months. That's the only optic I care about. He walked away before he said something he'd regret, his hands shaking with suppressed anger. But over the next week, the whispers grew louder, more insidious. Someone wrote a blind item in the Lego Society column. Which widowed tech titan is getting too comfortable with the help? A photo appeared on a gossip blog, Vivian and the boys at the playground, all of them laughing. The caption read, Nanny or something more? Then came the call that made Felix's blood run cold. Mrs. Adebayo from Evergreen Academy, the elite private school where he'd enrolled James, Peter, and Daniel for the fall semester, called his office directly. Her voice was apologetic but firm. Mr. Toju, given the recent attention and considering the sensitivity of our other family's concerns, perhaps it's best if the boys start next semester instead. Felix gripped his phone so hard he thought it might crack. You're rejecting my sons because of gossip? We're protecting all our students from unnecessary scrutiny, she said smoothly, using the kind of corporate speak that meant nothing and everything. My children are being punished for having someone who loves them, Felix said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. Mr. Toju, please understand our position. Felix hung up without another word. His chest felt like it was caving in. Not because of the school. He had enough money and connections to find another one. But because he knew what this meant. Vivian would hear about this. She'd see the articles and the gossip. She'd know she was the reason his sons were being rejected, whispered about, judged. And she'd leave. He drove home faster than he should have, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When he got there, he went straight to Vivian's room in the guest cottage behind the main house. The door was open. She was packing. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with neatly folded clothes. She moved mechanically, robotically, placing shirts and skirts inside with trembling hands. Felix stood in the doorway, frozen, watching his worst fear come true. Vivian, he said when she finally turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from crying. I can't stay, Felix. Don't, Felix said, his voice coming out rough, almost desperate. Please don't. Vivian kept folding clothes, her hands shaking. I have to. Your sons were rejected from school because of me, because of gossip, because of people who think. Her voice broke. Because of people who don't matter, Felix finished for her. They matter to James, Peter, and Daniel, Vivian said, her voice cracking completely. They're going to grow up hearing whispers. They're going to be punished because I forgot my place. Your place. Felix stepped into the room, his heart pounding. Your place is with my sons. Vivian shook her head, tears falling onto the shirt in her hands. I'm a nanny, Felix. That's all I was supposed to be. That's all society will ever let me be. You stopped being just the nanny the day my sons started laughing again, Felix said fiercely. Then what am I? She turned to face him, her eyes fierce and broken at the same time. What am I supposed to be to them? To you. Felix opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat, tangled with fear and hope and feelings he wasn't ready to name. Vivian let out a bitter laugh. You can't even say it. Because the truth is, I'm young. I'm staff. I'm not from your world. And people will always make assumptions. Your sons will pay the price their whole lives if I stay. Let them assume, Felix said. I don't care what they think. You should care. Her voice rose with emotion. James, Peter, and Daniel deserve better than being the center of a scandal. They deserve better than. Then what? Felix shot back, his own voice rising. Then someone who loves them? Then the only person who made this house feel like home again after their mother died. The silence between them crackled with electricity and unsaid words. Vivian sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, her shoulders dropping in defeat. When Alice died, she whispered, staring at her hands, I promised myself I'd never love another child. Because losing her almost killed me. Because the pain was so unbearable, I didn't think I could survive it happening again. She looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her face. But your boys, I couldn't help it. From the first day, when Daniel looked at me with those sad eyes, when James wouldn't speak, when Peter asked if I was going to leave like everyone else, I couldn't help loving them. And now I have to leave before loving them destroys me. Before loving them destroys them. Felix knelt in front of her, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. What if you didn't have to leave? He said urgently. What if I told the truth publicly? What if I made it clear you're not just staff? What if I fought for this, for us? Vivian's eyes searched his face desperately. What truth? That you're essential, Felix said, his voice breaking. That my children need you. That he stopped, swallowed hard. That I need you too. Her breath caught audibly. Felix, not as a nanny, not as staff, Felix continued, the words pouring out now. As someone who understands this grief I'm drowning in. Someone who sits with me in the dark when I can't sleep. Someone who brought light back into a house that was dying. Someone who gave my sons permission to be children again. I'm not her, Vivian whispered brokenly. I'll never be Victoria. I know, Felix said, his voice cracking. And I'm not asking you to be. Victoria she was everything to me. Losing her broke something fundamental in me. But you're teaching me that broken things can still hold something beautiful. I'm just asking you to stay. Please stay. Because when I think about you leaving, when I think about this house without you in it, I can't breathe. Vivian covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Felix stayed on his knees, waiting, terrified she'd still say no. Finally, she looked at him through tears. If I stay, it can't be like this, Vivian said firmly. I won't hide. I won't pretend to be less than I am. I won't let your sons grow up thinking love is something to be ashamed of. Felix shook his head vigorously. I don't want you to hide. I don't want you to be anything but exactly who you are. Your world won't accept me, Vivian said quietly, honestly. I'm young. I'm not from your social class. I don't have the right education or connections. Society will judge us. They'll judge your sons. Felix didn't hesitate. Then my world needs to change. And if it won't, we'll build a new one. Vivian stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her eyes. Fear giving way to hope, doubt giving way to possibility. I'll stay, she said quietly but firmly. But not as your employee. As myself. All myself. No apologizing, no hiding, no pretending. I wouldn't want it any other way, Felix said, relief washing over him in waves. She stood, and he stood with her. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two broken people who'd found something fragile and real in the wreckage of their losses. Vivian reached out slowly and began unpacking her suitcase. Felix finally breathed properly for the first time in hours. The following week, Felix had a scheduled interview with Vanguard newspaper. His PR team had prepared standard talking points about his company's new product launch, carefully crafted statements about market expansion and innovation. But when reporter Nancy Adeyemi sat across from him in his office, Felix had different plans. They went through the business questions mechanically. Then Nancy paused, consulting her notes. Mr. Toju, if I may shift gears, there's been some public interest in your personal life lately. Would you care to comment? His PR director, standing by the door, gave a sharp shake of his head. Don't engage. Felix ignored him completely. What specifically? He asked calmly. Nancy hesitated, clearly surprised. The speculation about your relationship with your children's caregiver. The old Felix would have said, no comment, and ended the interview. But he thought about Vivian packing her suitcase, about his sons' faces, about hiding versus living. Yes, Felix said clearly. "I'd like to comment." Nancy's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Vivian Michael is the reason my sons are alive in the ways that matter," Felix said, his voice steady and sure. "After their mother died, they stopped talking, stopped playing, stopped being children. I hired specialists, therapists, tried everything money could buy. Nothing worked." He leaned forward, and then Vivian showed up. She didn't try to fix them with psychology or techniques. She just loved them. She played horse with them. She read them stories. She sat with them through nightmares. She gave them permission to heal. "Some have suggested the relationship is inappropriate," Nancy said carefully, professionally. Felix's jaw tightened. "Some people see a young black woman caring for 3 children and automatically assume something improper. That says more about them than it does about her. It says more about our society's prejudices than about our family. So the relationship is strictly professional?" Nancy pressed. Felix paused. This was the moment. This was where he either retreated into safe corporate speak or told the truth. "Vivian Michael is family," he said clearly. "She's not their mother. No one could replace Victoria. But she's someone they love, someone they need, someone who makes our house a home. And I won't apologize for having her in our lives. Not to anyone." He didn't stop there. "Even if it costs opportunities for my sons. Any institution that rejects my children for being loved by someone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable has no business raising them anyway." The interview went live the next morning. By noon, it had exploded across social media. Half the internet praised his honesty, his defense against prejudice, his courage to speak truth. The other half tore him apart, accused him of using his privilege, of romanticizing the help, of moving on too quickly from his late wife. His board called an emergency meeting. Felix walked into the conference room to find 12 concerned faces. "The optics are problematic," his chief marketing officer began, pulling up social media analytics. "We're seeing negative sentiment." "I don't care about optics," Felix interrupted calmly. "I care about my family. This could affect stock prices," she insisted, showing him projected impacts. "Then let them fall," Felix said simply. "I built this company from nothing. I'll run it my way, and I won't compromise my son's happiness for shareholders who've never met them." The room went silent. 6 months later, the Alice and Victoria Foundation opened its doors. The east wing of the estate that had been closed since Victoria died was now filled with life. Families came from all over Nigeria, parents with sick children, grandparents raising grandchildren after tragedy, siblings trying to hold each other together while cancer or illness tore their worlds apart. The wing that had been empty for so long now hummed with conversation, with tears and laughter, with people learning how to survive the unsurvivable. At the small dedication ceremony, Felix stood at a simple podium. His prepared speech sat in his pocket, untouched. Instead, he spoke from his heart. "I built my company by believing in systems," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Data, processes, control. I thought if I could just understand how things worked, I could solve any problem." He paused. "Then I lost my wife, and I learned that some things can't be solved. Some things can only be survived." The room was absolutely silent. "I was failing at surviving," Felix continued honestly. "My sons were failing with me. We were drowning in a house full of everything except what we needed most." He looked directly at Vivian, standing in the back with James, Peter, and Daniel. "Then someone showed up who taught me that healing doesn't come from fixing. It comes from presence, from staying, from loving people in their mess and not asking them to clean it up first." Vivian's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "This foundation exists because 2 women believe that the only response to unbearable loss is unbearable love," Felix said, his voice thick with emotion. "My late wife, Victoria, who taught me what it means to give everything. And Vivian Michael, who showed my sons and me that it's possible to live again." He motioned to her. "Vivian, would you come up here?" She shook her head, but the boys pushed her forward gently, encouragingly. She walked to the stage on trembling legs. Felix pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "This makes you co-director of this foundation and legal co-guardian of my children." Vivian's knees nearly buckled. "You already are," Felix said quietly, steadying her. "This just makes it official." James, Peter, and Daniel ran onto the stage, wrapping themselves around her legs. She dropped to her knees, pulling them close, sobbing with joy and relief and love. The crowd stood and applauded, but Felix barely heard it. He was watching his family, the one grief had destroyed, the one grace had rebuilt. That evening, after everyone left, Felix found them in the garden. The boys were playing, chasing each other around the flowers they'd planted months ago in Victoria's memory. Vivian sat on Victoria's old bench, watching them with a soft smile. Felix joined her, sitting close but not too close, respecting the sacred space. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "For what?" Felix asked, genuinely confused. "For letting me stay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For fighting for me. For building something beautiful out of all this pain." Felix looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had walked into his broken life and refused to run from the wreckage. "I think God sent you," he said simply, honestly. Vivian turned to him, surprised. "I was angry at him for a long time," Felix continued. "For taking Victoria. For leaving me alone with 3 boys I didn't know how to reach. But then you showed up, and I realized maybe he didn't leave us alone at all. Maybe he just sent help in a way I didn't expect. In a way I almost missed because I was looking for something different." Fresh tears slid down Vivian's face. Daniel ran over, breathless and laughing. "Papa, Mama Vivian, come play with us." Mama Vivian. The name didn't hurt anymore. It felt right, like it had always been meant to be this way. Felix stood and pulled Vivian to her feet. Together they joined the boys in the grass, laughing and playing as the sun set over the garden where everything had changed. And as darkness gave way to stars, Felix understood something he'd been too broken to see before. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to grow. Victoria had taught him how to love fully, completely, without reservation. Vivian had taught him how to love again, how to open his heart after it had been shattered. And his sons, these 3 beautiful, resilient boys, had taught him that healing is possible, even when it feels impossible. The house that had once been a graveyard was fully alive again. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be completely gone, but because they had learned to carry it together. And somehow, in the carrying, they had found each other. Vivian caught his eye and smiled. Not the careful, professional smile from when she first arrived, but a real one, full of hope and belonging and home. Felix smiled back, feeling something he hadn't felt in over a year, complete. Because sometimes when everything falls apart, God puts the pieces back together in ways you never imagined. Not to erase what was lost, but to show you that love is bigger than grief. That presence is more powerful than perfection. And that family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stays when the world goes dark. It's who brings the light. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and let us know what part moved you most. We have many more beautiful, emotional stories coming your way. Stay blessed. And remember, love always finds a way. See you in the next story. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check response.